This past April 17th, Canadians rightfully celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Canadian Charter guarantees the rights of individuals by enshrining those rights and certain limits on them in the highest law of the land. Since its enactment in 1982, the Charter has created a social and legal revolution in Canada. It has expanded the rights of minorities and criminal defendants, transformed the nature and cost of criminal investigations and prosecutions, and subjected the will of Parliament to judicial oversight. This happens to be a very interesting year to have celebrated the anniversary of the Charter, since in the 40 years since it was signed into law by Her Majesty, I can't think of any other time when it has been so tested and disputed, tested by freedom convoys and medical mandates and emergency orders and travel bans and curfews and capacity restrictions, etc. For some, the pandemic has shown how the Charter succeeds. For others, it has shown how the Charter fails. This irony seemed to have been lost on the Prime Minister, who said last week that the document, quote, brings us closer as a country. I'm not sure I would have agreed with that observation this year. At the heart of the many conflicts over the Charter is a fundamental disagreement between left and right on what we mean when we say that the Charter protects basic rights and freedoms that are essential to keeping Canada a free and democratic society. And in particular, what we mean when we say that all of those rights and freedoms are, quote, subject to reasonable limits. Here is how the argument generally breaks down. Those on the left tend to define the Charter's role in advancing freedom by emphasizing the removal of inequality. Those on the right tend to define the Charter's role in advancing freedom by emphasizing individual liberty. The progressive sees freedom as a power to act, with the government getting in our way when necessary, while the conservative sees freedom as the absence of restraint, with the government getting out of our way as much as possible. Both ideas are right there in the Charter. It's just a question of which one you want to emphasize at a given time. But is there something missing from this freedom formula, this debate? Is the essence of progress really found somewhere along the spectrum of government restraint or presence? How significant a role, or insignificant a role, do charters and governments play in fostering a free society? One of the great lessons of Pesach, I think, is that the ingredients for creating a free society may be found more in this space, that is, in the religious space, more than they will be found in the halls of Ottawa or Washington. Moses, on the cusp of the most important political liberation in the history of the world, remember, does not speak about politics or about government or about law or about nationalism. Moses speaks about family, about the home, about parents and children. And thou shalt tell thy son in that day, saying, It is because of that which the Lord did for me when I came forth out of Egypt. The late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks notes that Moses fixed his vision not on the immediate, but on the distant future, not on adults, but on children. In so doing, he says, he was making a fundamental point. It may be hard to escape from tyranny, but it is harder still to build and sustain a free society. Moses' instructions on how to ensure the preservation and nurturing of freedom did not center on politics, but on private life, the passing down of values, having character, having an identity passed on from generation to generation. This in particular speaks profoundly to distressing indicators in society today. The statistics of those under 35 who have had a serious conversation with someone 60 or older are incredibly low. Perhaps this may explain, or help to explain, the tremendous shift of values and priorities that we see in society all around us. Christian Smith, the noted Notre Dame sociologist, studied the spiritual attitudes and moral beliefs of 18 to 23-year-olds. He explains that for these emerging adults, freedom is highly correlated with the ability to consume. Over half of those he interviewed in a survey conducted this year agreed that their well-being, quote, can be measured by what they own, but that buying more things would make them happier, and that they get a lot of pleasure simply from shopping and buying things, end quote. Freedom for many young people comes from the ability to choose, and to choose as much as possible. It's a rather idolatrous belief from a Jewish point of view. You might see the whole Torah as one big exercise in limiting people's choices, elevating them by calling upon them to make distinctions between the holy and the profane. In Judaism, freedom does not lead to endless choice. It leads to law. That is the connection between Passover and Shavuot during these days of the counting of the Omer. The law is there, represented by Shavuot, the holiday where we receive the law, because Judaism believes that freedom is not just achieved by emancipating the individual from coercion by others, but mostly by emancipating him from the tyranny of his unrestrained desire. In our religion, allowing somebody to consume maximally, to pursue his appetites and her passions, that is not freedom. It is a recipe for conflict and for war. For Judaism, the foundation of freedom is duty, obligation, and law, nestled deeply inside the character of each person. Government can help to support that freedom, but it is insufficient to create it or to sustain it. It all begins with moral character. We want government to fix our problems. We want government to help us progress as a society. But my point is that we too often forget the human, personal, moral aspect of progress, which in Judaism is a precondition for social progress. According to commentary, that is why the bull that the Kohen Gadol offers on Yom Kippur, as described in this morning's Parsha, must be his own bull. Even though he is a representative of the people and the bull is being sacrificed for the people, progress begins with individual accountability. Only when there is individual accountability can you give people the space to interact with each other relatively freely, because there is an assumption of honesty, of decency, of concern for neighbor, of deference to reason. The obligations we feel for ourselves and for our fellow allow for freedom to blossom and thrive. Without them, we need outside coercion, and freedom will wither. How do we instill those personal moral qualities? How do we provide an alternative to the consumerist materialistic impulse which more and more seems to define our personal ambitions? First and foremost, Moses had it right when he turned immediately to the family once the people had left Egypt. Marriage and the family do more than any other institution in imbuing the individual with a sense of responsibility. To live as a father and husband, wife and mother, child and sibling, is to live a life shaped by duties and obligations that sometimes grate, but often bring joy. Number 2, work. Work is another crucial element in this equation. Yes, work is a means to material support, but it's much more than that. Work provides dignity, inculcates responsibility, encourages energy and industry, and rewards reliability. Number 3, when Alexis de Tocqueville wrote of freedom and democracy in the United States, he stressed the importance of local government. This is what he writes: "Local institutions are to liberty what primary schools are to science. They put it within the people's reach. They teach people to appreciate its peaceful enjoyment and accustom them to make use of it. Without local institutions, a nation may give itself a free government, but it has not got the spirit of liberty." Number 4, military service instills strong values, selflessness, sacrifice, cooperation, and loyalty. This coming week, we will be honoring Israel's fallen soldiers on Yom HaZikaron and all members of the Israel Defense Force on Yom HaAtzmaut. And anyone who knows anything about Israel will tell you that the soul of Israel's democracy is formed and fashioned in the IDF. And finally, 5th, the practice of traditional religion, which by no means should surprise any of you. Religion teaches us to practice obedience, compassion, justice, lawfulness, and righteousness. It is a direct challenge to the excesses of our society and our culture, and prepares us to handle the burdens and the responsibility of being free. Once upon a time, all of these institutions, think about it, family, work, volunteerism, local institutions, military service, and religion, they were core, everyday occurrences in our society. Today, each one is in severe decline. Worse than that, each one is under attack from some place or another. We have come to believe that we can sustain our freedom without these and rely instead on government and its charters in order to protect us. That belief, in my opinion, is seriously misguided. It ignores the human, personal role in creating a free society. It poses a great danger to the success of freedom in this country and around the world. Canadians today are rightly worried about the health of our country. A national phone survey conducted last month by the Canadian Hub for Applied and Social Research at the University of Saskatchewan found 3 out of every 4 respondents that Canada has never been more polarized. We understandably seek solutions in our laws and charters, our public policies, our elected officials, and our governing institutions. And the point of my remarks this morning is not to say that these don't matter or to disparage them. God forbid, they are very important. But I would offer the story of our liberation from Egypt, our Exodus, a story that perhaps more than any other has inspired freedom throughout the world, and a story that teaches that greater progress towards freedom comes from the bottom up than from the top down. Not everyone has the good fortune to have a supportive family, to have a rewarding job, or a devoted faith. But I think we can do much, much better in this country to ensure that some combination of these soul-forming institutions is within reach for most people. Instead of weakening them and disparaging them or giving in to their demise, let us instead strengthen them and reinforce them, as they do in Israel, by the way. Let's speak about them as essential institutions to guarding our democracy, not outdated dinosaurs that get in the way of transforming our society into our own image. Some can worship the Charter. I prefer to honor it on its 40th anniversary, but I know what to worship. I feel more confident, more secure in my devotion to the Torah, which was our manual for freedom then and ought to remain our continuing manual for freedom now. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Atzmaut Sameach.